and think about it with a new perspective the next morning. I do think that there is no space. There shouldn't be a work environment where you don't feel comfortable taking something and sharing and having a conversation. But you can definitely work actively on getting out of your head. There are typically most employers provide employee assistance programs. So I've used them within my
Mm.
organizations, both my previous organization and the one that I currently work for. You can always, and there is benefit in talking to a stranger who doesn't know your context and your stories and what you're struggling with, but use those assistance programs to make a decision on where you could go to next. I do think most organizations have that. But also, I would say tap onto your friends, cohorts, your peers, because they're also probably going through similar challenges. And I think you may not have the courage to go up to your manager or to your boss, to your people leader and say, hey, this is what I'm facing. But I feel like you might be able to have that conversation with your peers, with your colleagues, and let's not assume that they're also not going through something similar. They might, if it is a workplace concern that someone's having, then it's potentially other people are impacted by it. So I do think that there is opportunity to reach out to family and friends for support. So I don't think anyone should go through anything without having that support system or having had the chance to reach out about whatever is concerning them at that moment.
Yeah, and I resonate with what you said in terms of even if you're not comfortable going to your leaders and having this conversation, but your colleagues and people around at work, because in the women leadership program that we run, we've heard so many women professionals talk about the biggest takeaway from programs like this is, of course, the skills and behaviors, etc. Keeping that aside, is the power of many that I am not alone in this journey. That I'm feeling like an imposter, like everyone else is. I'm going through the same pains that everyone else is, and I feel so much better knowing all of us are. And so it's such a relief. And I think half your burden is just kind of gone there, that I'm not doing it alone. There are, a lot of other people around me who are experiencing that. So it's a good, safe space to have that kind of conversation. And we all go through ups and downs. So it's just finding our people wherever they might be, whether it's friends, colleagues, coaches, mentors, or even ourselves sometimes. It helps. Otherwise, we have the Balance app to put you to sleep. That's a good one. We'll download it after this live. Brilliant, brilliant. And thanks for sharing a lot of internal, or some bit of internal barriers that we could be going through. I want to shift the gear towards the external challenges. And while I do ask this question, I know it's different for different organizations, different for geographies. But in your mind, what are some of the biggest external challenges that women leaders face at workplace today? And how do you think one can overcome that?
um I think I think when we talk about external, and I suppose when you say external, you're talking about not something like self-doubt that is individualistic, but potentially an organization structure or what the media is doing. So externally, you see stereotyping that's very commonplace. Everyone is collectively working towards dismantling the patriarchy, and the structures that are built around us are not built to bring our best selves to work, to thrive in that environment. And it could be really hard to work within those structures where we don't feel like we belong. It is almost like just being at a party but uninvited. So um, I do feel that organizations and leaders have this tremendous responsibility when it comes to creating workplaces and cultures where people can thrive. But it also is upon us to call it out. And as leaders within the business, we must stand up for what is right. So we have to call it out when certain things are not set up for equitable conversations in the workplace. So we have that responsibility to call it out. We also have the responsibility to make sure that we are giving other people the opportunity around us, so that it is not one voice, it is a collective voice, and that we ourselves are not adding to that culture, that we are actually making sure that people are recognized within the business, um, that we are providing that visibility to the next layer of people that should be recognized as leaders. So we do have the responsibility to create the workplaces that we want to build for ourselves. One of the things that I find this is, and I mean, I don't know if it is specific to women or not, but it's very when it comes to delegation and when it comes to creation of the next set of leaders, it is not for us to decide, okay, let me delegate the most boring thing that I do not want to work on. It's important for us to be able to delegate and create that opportunity by trusting our people, to be able to say that they will do a great job of it and they probably do a better job of it. So in terms of creating these structures, I think we've got that moral and responsibility and duty
obligation.
to make sure, yeah, the obligation, to make sure that we are not contributing to that question, to that external challenges that women face in the workplace, or people leaders face in the workplace. So A, we need to call it out, and B, we should not be contributing to it. Instead, we should do the opposite and dismantle those structures, and recognize that there are people that go by he and she, but there are also non-binary people. So I do think understanding that intersectionality, making sure that we are curious and making sure that we are catering to people's different needs in the workplace. I do think we've got those obligations as leaders in order to make sure that there is no external challenge in the future, that's the place we are creating.
Absolutely. And we're looking at, while you're sharing that, we're looking at, an environment or organization that's truly inclusive, irrespective of your background, gender, race, etc. And I agree in terms of the first step is speaking up and sharing what I feel that may not be going right, and how can I kind of, what steps I can take to mitigate that. If I could shift it a little bit and say, okay, and the perspective that you're coming from, Ash, I sense there is already a lot of courage. There is s- quite a degree, some bit of confidence and power when you share that we need to speak up. But there are also a lot of women professionals who probably haven't reached the journey. And I'm just not talking about journey in terms of your designation, but journey of life experiences as well that you've gone through, who may still not feel safe in whatever organization they may be to speak up. They could be, say, probably 10 years behind in terms of your career journey, which who was starting off. What do you feel are the pitfalls that, or the challenges they should or they can expect? And what can they do to overcome it? So, if you were again going back to your younger self, you're already very young, Ash. But if you're going back to your
I should
really
probably
younger
remove my glasses.
what would you tell yourself to do differently?
I think what is important, and I feel like the generations, I actually, let me take a step back. I have the fortune of leading a very young cohort of people within my organization. And I often joke and say I single handedly bring the average age up of my team. They are the new generation, and they come with a lot of self confidence, and they come with a lot of purpose. They understand why they are in this business, what is that they want to achieve. They know what they want from the workplace, and they know how to measure themselves. I do think if I had to look back, um, it's important when wherever whichever point of your career you are in to understand your your strengths and your weaknesses, and then as a result of that your spheres of influence. um I mean, in my own case, what I do feel like is, and I know this for myself, like having taken the strengths test within our organization, that my biggest strengths are in activating, in bringing people together, in my strengths are in command and woo, like those are my, like, winning over others. So my strengths are in a certain area. That is where I can influence. I'm a kingmaker rather than necessarily being the king itself. So I understand where my strengths are. And by the same token, I also understand where my greatest weaknesses are. I love looking at what opportunities we have for the client, but I'm not a great delivery person. And I probably should not be admitting to this on a LinkedIn Live. But there are people, project managers, scrum masters within the business that have the experience, the qualification, that attention to detail when it comes to delivering a project. So I understand what my weaknesses are and what are the spheres that I should not be operating within. So for someone who is early in their careers, I think it is important for them to understand exactly their strengths and weaknesses. If it is the courage to speak up, if that is your limitation, then have someone be your spokesperson. See if you can influence someone to speak on behalf of you. See if you can anonymously even make a petition to the organization that you're working for. So I do not necessarily think it's so much about which part of your career you are in. It's about understanding what are your strengths and weaknesses, and therefore what you can influence and how you can play your cards. I think that's super important. And also, and I think I've said this earlier as well, it's really important for you to surround yourself with different people and different voices of reason and guidance and positivity and coaching, because you don't know what you don't know, and all of us are in like a continuous learning journey. So it's important for us to have those conversations. I still talk to one of my professors from the university that I went to. I have a much more a more meaningful relationship in terms of him being my life coach, my mentor. And he Those conversations are very important, and I realized, and they're important to me in my career. So you do need to know yourself, but also make sure that there are people around you who give you that feedback, and be open to that feedback, and be specific about the feedback that you're looking for. I think often, and I recognize this when we give feedback, especially to women, we say, oh, you're great at organizing, you're great at, it's a collective feedback that you get given. It is not specific to your leadership skills. So I often ask the question, okay, can you give me specific feedback that refers to my leadership over here, and what is that I can be doing better? So it's important for us to be a understand ourselves, but b very like be really diligent about getting that feedback and constantly working on ourselves by surrounding ourselves with people who'd give us that valuable feedback, right?
I think you hit the bull's eye in the feedback bit, because often when we seek feedback, we are at a receiving end and we're just absorbing what was said. But I think at that moment, analyzing, dissecting it, and asking yourself, is it complete for me? And no, it's not complete. And going back to the feedback give and say, can you be specific in my leadership skills? Great, thanks for sharing, my general feedback. Well, what are the two areas of my leadership? I think that's really powerful, and that's where that's going to give us insight to move ahead. And so we often say giving feedback is an art, but receiving feedback is a finer art. And so this is really great input in when you're receiving. First, ask, and when you're receiving, is that um, feeding you or bringing value to you? Super. And what I also got from that question is there will be external challenges, and we don't know what that could be for different organizations. But what you can focus is in your control, which is your own self awareness.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
time that time use for your own self awareness and development, and find your strengths. Start sharpen your saw. If you feel helpless around you, but sharpen that bit. Find out what are your strengths, and then go towards that. I feel that's great for even mental well-being, because you're doing something constructive and you feel you're in control of something, and that's going to serve you at the end.
100%.
Brilliant, brilliant. Now I'm going to move to advantages. I talked about challenges that women leaders can face, but I also feel that, every role has its pros and cons in any place that you look at. And I also do very strongly believe there's also advantages. Being a leader who happens to be a woman gender, what are those advantages? And going leveraging from a last question, putting the light towards your strengths. What's in your control? What would be some of the advantages that a women leader can be? And this question would be like open for everyone. So maybe a leadership team that doesn't have enough women representation, what are the things, the skills they may be missing out if we don't have enough women in the leadership table?
That one's in terms of in addressing that question, and I want to be very careful about not stereotyping genders over here. Um, but I do believe that there is a lot of merit in and I want to start off by stating nurturing as one of the qualities that people can bring to the table. And you don't have to be a parent. That is not the role that I'm referring to, but in general, creating a nurturing workspace that need not be necessarily competitive in the sense of the term competition. It can still be a really driven team, but it could be a team that is brought up to say it's okay to have your points of differences, but you say that in a very respectful sort of a way to create those safe spaces. I do think that some people are really well positioned to bring that aspect, to create flexible workplaces, because you're possibly multitasking and you understand the value of flexibility. I think more and more as we go into, I mean, it's not even the future of work, it's the current of work. So we are in a position to create those flexible, nurturing workspaces, and also creating workspaces that are not necessarily this is what it looks like, a hierarchy on paper, but something that is pretty flat and intuitive, allowing for people to grow and thrive. I do think it comes to a lot of people quite naturally, the intuition, which could be an advantage for some genders over others, and the ability to tap into networks. And I often go back and think about the time I have with my girlfriends, because we connect regularly, we connect often, and we exchange stories, and we are really kind of pepping up each other. We're saying, oh, you're doing this, this is fantastic. We're celebrating each other's success. And contrary to popular belief, I do think women do a great job of supporting women in the workplace, and they can do a better job of that. I do think we can almost kind of flip the patriarchy on its head if we come together to create those workplaces that are built on nurturing flexibility, intuition, and tapping onto your network. So yeah, I would say those are some potentially, I feel like I'm stereotyping here, so I want to stay away from it as much as possible. Potentially some advantages that you can have when you look at creating an equitable workplace.
Yeah, and they're brilliant insights on behaviors as well. S- and I know you've also yesterday mentioned that I want to stay away from stereotyping women and men. I know you shared that yesterday. And while saying that, obviously, it is open to all genders, and you may have people from different backgrounds behaving in different ways, unlike the stereotype that we are aware of. But in this case, I do believe nurturing intuition, getting people together, championing the team. I think those are really natural instincts that most women do carry and can bring to the table in terms of leadership in creating that culture in the organization. In one word, just creating a psychological safe space for people to just be who they are.
And I'm saying that because some of my greatest champions have been men in the workplace, and they've stood for me, they've batted for me, they've said to even external people that we will not be going ahead with this project if you do not apologize to Ash right now,
Yeah.
and or they've given that feedback. For me, that means that you're playing that role of someone who would nurture, who would protect me as your team member, and that's why I don't want to stereotype, because I've seen those behaviors from men in the business, and it comes back at the end of the day to all of us as leaders working towards creating that sense of safety, that sense of belonging, right? But yeah, I do think that that it's important uh, to be, and I suppose it's okay to be vulnerable at the workplace, and I think we should make it more and more okay.
Yeah.
I so I mean, at the cost of sometimes even oversharing, I tell my team about uh, either my the conditions, the medical conditions that I have, and therefore the kind of support that I might need from time to time. And my teams are, I've noticed recently that we're going above and beyond to make sure that we are giving each other that support that people need when they're going through a hardship in their personal life. So I do think that we can say it's completely okay. We don't have to be driven by behaviors that have been historically established as being leadership, and therefore you need to be aggressive or and do things in a dominant sort of a way. Not to say that I wouldn't be aggressive if I were going after a sale, but you don't need to be one way in order to be a leader. And I feel like that's the message that we should be driving.
Absolutely. It's about adaptive leadership. You wear different hats at different times.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're absolutely dominating, and sometimes you're absolutely caring. Just depends on the situation. And since you brought the topic about champions, and I've also had champions who happen to be male leaders or male colleagues who really supported me. My own partner, Gatik, in many ways supports champions, pushes me ahead. And I also find that they have a knack of picking talent in you, which you would not have admitted. And they're like, hey, I think you are capable of doing it. Go ahead and just jump and just do it. So I think that's great support that you can get from male leaders. And in the line that I worked with most of my clients happen also to be male, and the amazing clients. Some of the questions they ask me is, I know there's a lot of work happening in women leadership, and you're doing work with women professionals. How can we champion this cause in organizations? What can we do specifically? Because we haven't completely understood. We are there for them, we support, but what are some of the behaviors or some steps that we can take to build an equitable workplace? Would you have some insights on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first, the very first thing that comes to my mind is the whether you are male or female, make sure that the invisible workload that you're aware, when you're asking someone to arrange for flowers or to organize a lunch or to organize a party, that you are not naturally handing it over to a woman. I, for example, make sure that I hand over to two people so that there is. I know we're talking binary over here, that there's a male and a female lead for every event that we organize. So I think it's important for you to be conscious of the language that you're using, and and even the iconography that you're using in your presentations, that when you put the icon for a delivery lead or a lead, like you don't have that of a male icon versus you can just have a unisex icon over there.
Yeah.
So the language that we use, the kind of symbolism that's there in the workplace, I think it's important for us to be aware of that, making sure that we are calling out, and especially now that we are going into a future where there is a lot of Zoom calls and Teams calls, etc., making sure that everyone is heard, and that when someone cuts off another person, especially if that individual happens to be a woman, just saying, hey, why don't we give this person a chance to talk? And I think you should do it irrespective of whether that person is a woman or not. But I do think, some of the tiniest of behaviors will have the biggest of impact and change. I do think everyone has that responsibility uh, to make sure that there is that self-awareness going on as you distribute the workload within the team. Who are you distributing the workload to? Are you making assumptions? Are you making an assumption that someone can do this job over the weekend because they don't have children? Like, that is also a form of discrimination, right? I feel like those are some of the behaviors that we can be conscious of, and support our people in order to create that equal team that we talk about. It's important to understand if the organization has policies around carers, around flexible work, around reproductive assistance, etc. And if those policies do exist, I mean, if those policies don't exist, see if you can do anything to
Yeah.
get bring those policy changes within your business.
Mhm.
But if they do already exist, make sure that you communicate that to the people and tell them it's okay for them to make use of those policies, to take that leave that was necessary, to go on that extra hour break because they were caring for someone, or they were simply taking that time off to walk their dog, or to go attend to something that just came up, or probably they want to work in a flexible kind of a way. It's
Yeah.
important for us to make sure that we understand the policies and we talk about those policies with our teams, and it's important to build that trust, so that then we don't have, I mean, that's when that culture just gets created. It's not something that you have to really strive hard for. Just by being your authentic self, you are creating a space where people can be themselves and bring their best selves to work.
And those are some great examples that you shared, and I resonate with it in terms of workload that's given, that's again stereotyped, or the symbols that you put. But I also feel a lot of that is done unconsciously. It's not people doing it deliberately. And to what you said, you don't know what you don't know. How do we still, and I know there are policies in place, which may not cover everything, especially unconscious biases. How do we get people to know what they don't know? And something as small and subtle as this, which doesn't necessarily get covered in policies, but to make this cultural, wave that happens in an organization. Are there some best practice or something that's done at large scale so we have a faster movement to the support?
um, I do think so. Large organizations do unconscious bias training, and all of us, even if we are leading gender equity teams, all of us have unconscious biases.
Yeah.
And if you have the benefit of working for a large organization, there's probably a training that you can be a part of. But one of the things that you could do is, especially when you believe that the person has made a comment or said something, or is creating this, or is notorious for a particular behavior, I do think that there's value in taking them aside in private, asking them, hey, do you realize that this is how it comes across as, or even asking, why did you hand over this particular task to me?
Yeah.
Do
Mm.
you think I could now pass this on to someone else? Because I don't either want to do it, or I would love to have some support doing it, or like to share my duties, or what you think, what you're assigning to me with someone else. So I do think it's important for us to call out. And as you said, not everyone is aware of the their own biases. So it's important to first question, understand, call out, and give them that feedback. And I think most leaders are, at least the good ones, are really open to that feedback. And I have of course, I have the fortune of working for an organization where there is a zero tolerance policy, and there is also no retaliation for bringing up an uncalled for behavior. Um, but I do think if you have the chance to bring it up in private, then you're
Yeah.
also not necessarily putting the person in an uncomfortable place, but also getting what you want communicated to them. So um, yeah, that is something that I would recommend, that you actively call it out. And if you see it happening to a colleague of yours, call it out.
Mhm.
Make sure that you say, you either put up your hand, or you say, hey, why don't we pass this this responsibility onto somebody else. And
Yeah.
I have done this at work, and it's worked successfully. um, Men can be great party planners. You don't need to necessarily have a certain biology in order to organize lunches or to send flowers. So I do think it works if you actively try to change it.
Yeah, yeah. Or there's probably talent hidden. So you want to kind of encourage that talent to
Yeah,
come out and
yeah,
break stereotypes over
yeah,
there.
absolutely.
But yeah, so one is right. If unconscious bias sessions are great. Second is you speak up, you see something happening, and very gently in a safe environment, one on one, just say, hey, this happened. Also, if you're on the other side, one way to find out if you don't feel anyone's coming and giving you feedback, have probably safe listening sessions and say,
Yeah,
hey, in the last 6 months, can you share some behaviors of mine where you feel that has something to do with stereotyping or my own unconscious behavior? This is my own learning session. So invite all of you to, help me with that. And that's, I think, one way where male leaders can create that environment. And if they want to ask, what can I do? This is a great way to start off, which is in your control. If there's no sessions happening, go ahead and just invite a group of people you feel comfortable having that conversation, and hey, just include that feedback for yourself.
absolutely.
Brilliant, brilliant. I see a lot of questions popping up, but
Oh, do you?
yes, before I move to those questions, I do want to kind of um, come back to very specific questions in terms of your own role model. Who's your role model that you look up to and say, hey, seems all sorted, but we all know nobody's sorted, but yeah, you still have one.
Well, I do have. So my mum is my biggest role model. Before she retired, she was auditing foreign governments, and she's an absolute gun when it comes to finances and investments. And she's
Wow.
taught me that just because you can do something doesn't mean you necessarily have to do it. I think she kind of propagated the message of like YOLO before YOLO was like a hashtag, I suppose. So my mum absolutely is my biggest role model. From a If I had to give uh, a a more common example or role model would be our ex Prime Minister Julia Gillard, and she was the Deputy Prime Minister of the country when I moved to Australia, and she'd come to inaugurate one of the building facilities at the university that I then worked at, and then she went on to be the prime minister, and she inspires so many people with her leadership, or she inspired with her leadership. The books she writes today, as well as her very famous anti-misogyny speech. And I happened to see her at an airport when she was the prime minister. She was at the Cairns airport, and I rolled my windows down and I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe my eyes." And she said, "Even the prime minister has to go on a break sometimes." And I thought it was fantastic to see her living that. I do think
Yeah.
we need to learn to take breaks, to take pauses. I suffer from, not taking enough breaks and rests as I should be. But yeah, she's someone I find absolutely inspirational. So, mum, and then the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, ex Prime Minister.
Beautiful. And that's such a powerful message to give, right? The prime minister needs a break once in a while. Everyone needs a break. So that's actually, walking the culture that you want to create for
Yeah.
yourself. Beautiful. And is there any book or TV show that you feel that it's a must read or great for women professionals?
There's actually a podcast that I started on this during the pandemic break. There's one called Women at Work. It's the Harvard Business Series one, and it's really bite sized, like 25-30 minutes, and it talks about anything from like delegation, playing office politics. Those are the two things that come to my mind. But it's a fantastic podcast to listen to. Absolute must listen, because you've got everyone from like an aerospace engineer talk about delegation um, to people talking about how do you tackle office politics. It's an absolutely good one to listen to.
Wow, I love the topic. Women at Work, guys, podcast from Harvard. We're going to be
It's a
logging
good
in
one.
quickly on that. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm going to move to the questions now, Ash. So we've got a few questions from our listeners, our viewers. The first one being, how do you choose your mentors and coaches? From Akila Menon.
I think rely on your gut, go by intuition, go by people who will be honest and transparent with you. You don't need your coaches and mentors to necessarily always tell you how good you are. You need for them to tell you what are your gap areas, to be there to play those various roles or hats for you. So for me, I've realized not one individual can actually satisfy those needs that I have. So I have multiple mentors and coaches, and I catch up with them, with all of them regularly. So you need to vibe with them, you need to gel with them, you need to be able to have those real honest conversations with them and be super vulnerable and say, this is what I'm feeling like I really need for you to put apply your lens on it. So just your vibe and gut feel, but also in terms of this could be on LinkedIn or at a social collective that you are a part of. These mentors and coaches need not necessarily be from your own field. They could be friends of friends, they could be siblings of friends, etc. So I do think that yeah, choose people based on how well you'd be able to, how easily and open you could be with them. That's how you should be choosing your mentors. And if it is within the organization, I'm sure you'll know which, I mean, do you want to go into data or you want to go into creatives or design? Like, you should be able to identify those individuals, but choose them only if you vibe well with them.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. And this is one lesson I learned some time ago is don't expect one person to be everything for you. So
It's
even
impossible.
it's impossible, but you don't, especially if you look at your partner and you will think, okay, your partner should be available to listen to you, to empathize with you, to love you, to give you distance, to everything. And you're just putting unreasonable expectation on the relationship and the partner as
Absolutely.
well.
You say such a, I mean, that's the same case with my partner. I know exactly what I can expect from him, and he is very, and I have multiple roles. Like, my best friend plays a particular role. I go to her every time I need to discuss something that I know that my partner can't provide. So it's just impossible for one person to be everything for you. So you need to have that system.
Yeah, yeah, and same for even professional network. I mean, if you want some advice for brilliant ideas, there's somebody else to empathize, somebody else for you to release. And then you should always have a coach and a therapist on your speed dial too, because there will be moments you need to decide, is this a therapist moment or is this a coach moment? But that's
And
super
please, let's
helpful.
normalize therapy already.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's why I said with the coach,
Yeah.
because people look at coach as or getting a coach or mentor as very forward looking. I'm getting somebody to help me move ahead. So is a therapist
Absolutely.
doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a very thin line difference, and so yeah, they're all very important in your speed dials. Super. I have one question from Urvashi Varma. How important is sharing knowledge among leaders across companies to bring the best practices and use for making change at society level, particularly from a DEI perspective?
Hey, it's super important and super critical. We are all solving the same problem, right? We all want to dismantle patriarchy. We all want to create organizations where people can bring their best selves to work. Everyone has the same intention. Some organizations are really there on the maturity curve. They've started a long time ago. They have all of the financial, the brain power behind this. And some organizations are just starting out. So it's really important. And there are forums, there are multiple organizations, like this one, for example, Transform Me, where people are bringing together those that are working in DEI um, to be sharing and exchanging knowledge and best practices. But I want to say that it doesn't need to be those people that are responsible for DEI within the organization only. When you hear about what's really working well in another organization, we often exchange, hey, how much are you making? How much am I making? But how how do you take feedback to your manager? So you can be exchanging notes even at individual levels to kind of bring those systems and practices to your own teams and to your own organizations. No one's going to actually give you a hard time for creating a good culture at work. So I feel like it's absolutely critical that organizations share that, and there's a lot of DEI forums that do that, but sometimes it could be restricted to those people that represent these organizations. And by the time it translates and comes down to a policy or to actual change, you know um, you could have kind of missed what was exchanged. So I do think as individuals as well, we have the opportunity to to exchange notes on that. This is like sharing a good party game that we went to and said, oh, well, like, at the other party I played this game, and why don't I play the same game at this party that I'm organizing? It's something similar to that.
I love that. Make it fun.
Yeah.
Let's do a DNI party. Super. Yeah, I had one woman lead I was coaching, and she was head of delivery, and she says, this thing really touches my heart, and I want to do something in DEI. But we have a DEI leader, and she's brilliant, and I obviously don't want to take her position. What can I do? And then she worked on in her own role, which has nothing to do with DEI. She started running training programs and campaigns, and she picked up something that was not too prevalent, the ageism. And she did amazing amount of research. She went to the UN archives, picked up information from there, shared it within the organization, and created a plan. This is what we should start doing. And I felt so good to see, that's the message. All of us be part of it. We don't need to carry that role, but just go ahead and spread it. And that's how you make it real and not just an initiative.
Yeah.
Super. I'm coming to Amita Malhotra Lalwani's question. There was this survey done last year which examined the attitude of 1,000 Australian men, found 48% fatigued by the notion of gender equality, and 52% feel they are being discriminated against, with women being favored for promotions and jobs on the basis of the gender. Have you experienced this work, and how do you address this attitude of male colleagues at work?
I think I know the survey that Amita is referring to. This was done by the Dream Collective, in fact. And it is true that when we are having conversations constantly about gender equality in the workplace, it might sound as if we are discriminating against one gender. And sometimes I take a step back at this, and I think about it. It's about I to answer Amita's question, I have not particularly faced this in the workplace, and I suppose I have the fortune of belonging to a workplace where, in fact, the conversations are more around how do we create these equal workplaces, and people are, especially leaders, are actively engaged in that part. I haven't directly heard any comments on that, and I will stop referring to it, talking about my specific workplace. But I suppose the question comes down to establishing the intent of having these conversations. Why are we striving to create this? Because honestly, we have a banner up in one of our offices where it says none of us are equal until all of us are equal. And I think the message there is to help people understand the intent behind this. Again, it's not just from a gender perspective, it is from an intersectional perspective around equal opportunities for people, irrespective of their age, their racial background, their, whether they are um, able or not, and so on, right? So I do think that as leaders we have the responsibility of communicating that intent. And if we do feel that sense of exhaustion or that kind of frustration, it's important to be transparent around how, um, why we are doing this and how we are doing this, and also making sure that criteria for promotions at work, the discussions around why we are, how we are evaluating our people, promoting our people, everything is clearly communicated, and we are transparent about the goals that we are trying to reach. So, if in some places, if it does have to come down to a quota in order to get to that equality, then let's say it. Let's just call it out and say this is what is important, and therefore this is a metric that we're going to measure ourselves as against, and therefore this is how we are hiring and recruiting. And let's be honest about how we are evaluating our people. And I do not necessarily think that'll be lost on people. I do know what the survey said, and the kind of the general exhaustion around these topics. But keep in mind, if this is not something that you did, you reserved for an IWD, and you didn't do this as a one off, or you didn't do this, this was kind of ingrained into your organizational behavior, into your leadership behaviors, then this would not be such a frustrating thing. Then this would not be something that would be looked upon as being discriminatory at all. Because people understand why it is important, and yeah, I think that's the communication of intent, and the communication with the right language is also important. And if there is a sense that that people feel that there is a discrimination in the workplace, it's important for us to establish um, why that is the case, and how we can potentially make sure that that's being addressed.
Yeah, yeah. I want to double click on the word why you said. And sometimes we miss the big why with, moving on the change. Change is important and getting on with the change. But the why and context gets important and missed out because you don't drive the change from an inside out then. And that's why you have exhaustion, you have indiscrimination, words like that come in. And I think if you just pause and say, it is a movement happening. And if you go back in history, movements happen for a reason. And let's figure out what that reason is. Why is there so much focus on, say, women and DEI, etc.? Let's figure that out with a very open, curious, and empathetic mindset and flow with this moment until we reach the target or the goal that we're looking at. And then the movement fades away and then the new movement starts. I think that kind of conversation may not be happening enough and transparently in organizations. Yes, the initiatives happening, there's sessions happening, there's policies, but just getting people together and reflecting on why is it real and how can you be part of it, not the organization, you, I think will make a difference.
And I think it's, I'm sure, when women were fighting for voting rights, there was a section of society that felt the same frustration, but we didn't stop fighting for the voting rights back then. And I think, we need to continue to have these conversations irrespective of whether people feel that exhaustion or not. We do have that responsibility to communicate and to keep on fighting, right? And I use the term fighting in a loosely. I think all of us really must invest our efforts in creating these workplaces. It's so important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's championing it. Just picking up a second last question, and I love the question, Flo. It just says that the conversation's been so rich that people want to put in their perspective as well. So the next question is from Rohan Singh, and then we'll just quickly wrap up. It's interesting and honest conversation. Would love to know your perspective on if we can generalize that a particular gender is more adept or naturally suited to being an empathetic leader.
Oh, absolutely. And Rohan, the- I definitely don't believe in gender stereotyping. In fact, there is someone in my organization, and she leads up one of our HR teams, and she has shown me how, the 24 strengths chart, and empathy is the last on her list. And she always laughs about it. She says, "I'm in HR, and empathy is the last trait on my list." That's not to say that it's not her top strength, and so I don't a personally, I don't think that certain traits are, come naturally
Limited.
to some genders. Um, but I do think, based on. So, I mean, did I answer your question? I think I did. Um, I feel like we could use opportunities to show that empathy, to display that trait, to say that any trait, whether it's empathy or being nurturing or being an activator or being flexible, none of these need to be gender specific, but a lot of a lot of traits are a lot of leaders have common traits, and I do think that we can use that to our advantage, and use our own strengths to create those settings for our people. um, yeah, that would be my reflection on it. It doesn't need to be, just because I'm a woman doesn't mean that I'm naturally nurturing. I don't believe in that at all.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, I think earlier there could be talent sitting inside you that you haven't displayed or brought that out. And so maybe we haven't with our roles, and now probably it's the time to just explore that. So it's brilliant. Brilliant answer. And I knew that answer was going to come as a no from you, anyways. But closing the life with, resonating with the topic that we're looking at, women as playbook, I'm going to pick up Luan Chana's last question is, what are the skills? Yeah, what do you think is the most important piece of advice for women who want to pursue a career as a leader?
I think, Luann, I'm going to share with you something that I learned last week, which is just acknowledging that, hey, um, you have it in you to be a leader. I think it's, and just saying it, and being open about it, and working towards it, and taking the support of people in order to get there, and also creating those spaces as you go on that journey. So my piece of advice is, start off and acknowledge that you want to be a leader in your organization, and it's completely okay to want that, um, and to work towards that. I think you've got to own it. You've got to own your story. You've got to. This is coming from someone who has had so many self doubts. So that would be the advice I'd give myself and to you, to say, absolutely own that path, or to being a leader, and do
Yeah.
everything you can to get there. All the right
Yeah.
things.
I love that. I love that with all the self doubt, still own it. That's you. I'm
Yeah,
ready to
you
be
got
a
to
leader.
get yourself out of your head constantly, and then keep on moving towards that goal, right?
I know. Yeah. It's a smooth task in your head sometimes, but it actually isn't. So it's just go ahead, believe in yourself with all your self doubts. On that note, Ash, it's been brilliant. The hour has just flown by, hour and 4 minutes has just flown by. I've picked up rich insights from the conversation with you. So have the viewers for the kind of questions they put in. There are a lot of lovely comments too. By the way, I just only picked up the questions. I'm so sorry, but we'll share the comments with you soon. I think my top two big takeaways from our conversation with you today is, first, be self aware of your own strengths. Know your own strengths, own your own strengths, and go after it. And number two, create your support systems. Have your support systems in place, get the right people, get many people, and just have them there to champion you and back you up. So, such a brilliant evening. Thank you so much, Ash, once again. Thank you, viewers, listeners, for being present and sharing your thoughts too.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. This has been such a lovely evening.
Thank you.